co-founder of It's All Right to Be Woman Theater, the pioneering feminist theater troupe from the 1970s.
And I'm Jessica Del Vecchio, Assistant Professor of Theater at James Madison University in Virginia. Welcome to the third of our 3-panel series on feminist theater, past and present.
6 months ago, I reached out to Jessica with an idea for a panel that would bring together feminist theater artists to talk about their work. As Jessica and I brainstormed artists to invite, one panel morphed into 3. This is the third of the panels. We enlisted the help of Dr. Sarah Warner, who connected us with the extraordinary E. Cornell to bring our vision to life.
We hope that the conversations engendered in these panels will give audiences a sense of the trajectory of feminist theater in the U.S. over the past several decades. Our aim is to celebrate the artists of the past and to inspire feminist performance of the future.
And we'd like to thank the Performing and Media Arts Department at Cornell, James Madison University, Close to Home Productions, the Women in Theater Program, and Community Arts Partnership of Tompkins County for their support. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Sarah Warner, Associate Professor of Performing and Media Arts and the current Director of the LGBT Studies Program at Cornell University.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Jessica. It's been a blast to work with you on this series, and I'm very excited about tonight's conversation. This event is part of our year-long marking of the 30th anniversary of LGBT studies and the 50th anniversary of feminist gender and sexuality studies, formerly women's studies, at Cornell University. And a shout out to Paula Vogel, who was an early member of that women's studies cohort and an early instructor in the program. Please visit our website for a complete list of anniversary events. I'd like to make a land acknowledgement. Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayukono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gayukono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of Gayukono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of the Gayukono people, past and present, to these lands and these waters. And we also would like to recognize the land from our panelists and from our audience members as well. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Jessica Del Vecchio, who's going to moderate the panel this evening.
Thank you, Sarah. Just a couple of notes to our audiences. This event is being recorded and it will be viewable through the same URL afterwards. We are going to be taking questions from the audience toward the end of the panel, so feel free to submit questions in the chat, which you can open by clicking the dialog box at the top right of your video player. And throughout this discussion, we're going to be sharing URLs and resources in the chat as well, so be on the lookout for those. And if you are watching the archived recording, those links are available in the overview section just below. And now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists in alphabetical order. Haruna Lee is a New York City-based playwright and performer and co-founder of the Haruna Lee Theater Company, which created 6 original productions before lovingly disbanding in 2018. Lee is the winner of many awards and fellowships, including an Obie for their bilingual nightmare play, Suicide Forest. Brooke O'Hara is a Philly-based theater director. She is the co-founder of the Obie Award-winning company, The Theater of a Two-Headed Calf. O'Hara also co-founded its Dyke division and wrote, directed, and performed in the much-beloved live lesbian soap opera Room for Cream. Tina Satter is a New York City-based writer-director and founder of the critically acclaimed ensemble Half Straddle, whose work has been produced throughout the United States and internationally. Satter conceived and directed Is This a Room?, which is currently running on Broadway. And finally, Aladrian C. Wetzel, an actress, playwright, producer, and director, not to mention an engineer, and the executive director of the Two Strikes Theater Collective in Baltimore, an independent theater company she co-founded. A number of her plays are published on New Play Exchange, and her adaptation of Angelina Weld Grimke's Rachel was recently produced by Rapid Lemon Productions. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start with an easy question. In one sentence, how do you define feminism? Who wants to start? Tina, do you want to start us off?
I can give a answer that I have.
Yes.
I will say that feminism could be centering female-identified people, spirits, and stories.
Thanks, Tina. Anyone else want to jump in?
Jump off of Tina. Oh, feminism for me feels like an embodiment or a body. It feels like embodying my pluralities and allowing those pluralities to breathe. And I also think it's about rigor too. Like I think of rigorousness and work, like working towards accessing imagination that allows us to dream beyond incredibly oppressive structures.
Wonderful.
I'll jump in on top of that. I think feminism is really embodied with the word of strength. So often, women and women identifying people are seen as weak and weepy and emotional and what have you. But I always find those things are what make me powerful. My intersectionality of being a Black woman, my emotions, I think things that I have been through, the things that I have seen, all of those things are just strong. And I've always resonated with strength and having that power, that women are powerful, is something that I think really resonates with feminism.
Fantastic. Brooke, go ahead. You're muted.
So I think, this is great. I think for me, it's also just like giving the earth back to Mother Earth and sort of wresting the environment and all of this stuff like out of the hands of patriarchy. Like I think women of the world need to take over. And really, it is really kind of coming back to, even in strength, care and concern and centering the world, the kind of world and earth back in, maybe in the goddess. Maybe I'm going all the way there. Okay.
Great. These adjectives are awesome. So then I want to ask, given these definitions of feminism, how does feminism manifest in your work? So what kind of issues do you address in your work? Or do you consider the aesthetics and processes of your work feminist? And if so, how? Tina, can I start with you?
Sure. The feminism of it is just, to me, very implicit and has been always, and it's been implicit because of mostly who I worked with and then how we worked together and the kind of stories that I was making and showing on stage. Like it's just what's in it. It's never from the outside in, and it was often female landscapes and or female and queer or trans landscapes that were just queered, often femme spaces. The issues, there's different stories and plots and contexts that happen, but they're always about humans trying to figure out who they are for themselves and in relation to other people, and who are they in the world, and to make connections with others. That's very general, but that's always sort of the driving factor when I'm thinking of characters and what a story is about. And often they're female characters doing it, but they just happen to be female. It's not like, what are the female issues you're trying to address? They're very human and they may be tied to how that person happens to look or be seen by the world, but that's not the driving factor. The aesthetics of my work, I would say, are a kind of feminist thing that I think is fun to talk about, because I'm I'm into a high femme 13-year-old adolescent girl look. I like nail polished cheerleader, things, and I'm putting that they're not in every play, but I think that that stuff is really fun, and sort of reclaiming that that sort of style and very femme look on a range of characters has been, part of the aesthetics. Spaces that are sort of abstracted and not literal, but come from a sense of color, it on a set, and all those aesthetics, I think they're totally feminist. It's not about a patriarchal idea or the lens of what a space should be for a certain given space. And the processes, I think, yes. I mean, I'm a writer, director, usually working with my own theater company. So there is a bit of a hierarchy that I am sort of the head of that. But I think we've really worked in such a sort of, again, not always perfectly, but inherently sort of female and feminist way, where it's very much a porous thing. All voices are very heard and, open to speak up. Feelings are really taken into account a lot as we make things. Again, all of these have never been done perfectly, but the room really is designed to hold not just we've got to work and make it perfect, but how does it feel to make this? Can we actually have as much fun making this and make it really awesome and work really hard? Can we care for each other at the beginning, middle, and end of this? If not, why? Those to me feel like definitely things coming from a female center or a feminist idea. So yeah, those are just some starter things on that question.
Great, thanks, Tina. Haruna, can you speak to that in your work?
I'm really sitting with what Brooke shared about earth and land and mother and the return, the act of returning. And that to me feels really, I think, I feel a kinship to that in terms of process and in thinking about feminism. I think there's my processes, what feels feminist about it is this, it feels like I'm returning to a more and more and more authentic version of myself, and to be able to have the honor to do that with other people. And like what you shared, Tina, I think the community aspect of it, and to really center relationships within that, and to really listen to emotional intelligence, and that all of these things, like what you shared, Adrian, of strength and resilience, those, that coming out of that space feels very feminist to me in my process.
Fantastic. And Brooke, your work, in my opinion, really shifted when you established the Dyke division of the Theater of a Two-Headed Calf and started producing Room for Cream, which was your live lesbian soap opera. Was there something different to you about the aesthetics or the approach of the work of the Dyke division as opposed to the work of Two-Headed Calf in terms of feminism?
Well, I have to say Drum of the Waves is considered the first feminist play, which is a weird idea. Not by me, but Japanese feminists. I think, I'm not sure.
Which was a theater of the Two-Headed Calf show that you did right before forming the Dyke division, right?
We're doing them both at the same time. In a way, we started Dyke division while we were just working on that. Well, I think for me, it became about the difference is that the Two-Headed Calf was not precious, which I think is interesting, and had a sort of less controlled, it was open. Yeah, what happened is we just decided, I was I don't want to have to be in a room for 2.5 years and have the stakes be so high, but instead to be and to always be thinking sort of out to all the myriad of audiences or into the future. I wanted to be in a space that was about more immediate and coming in a room together and putting that work up and being in this kind of intimate conversation with collaborators where the things we cared about were the things that showed up. And I did it, because I was tired of imagining I was tired of imagining like a space I couldn't control, or like an audience I couldn't speak directly to, but like speak to through a press agent. I just wanted to speak to like the people, who I was talking to on a daily basis, and the people, my collaborators. So it was just like an intimate, intricate way of working that immediately had an audience, right? Because actually people want you to speak to those people. So it was really just thinking about how you make work and how you imagine your work into the world. And I went to imagine it in kind of a small, intimate way that was really about collaboration and play and not big success.
And yet it was a really popular, Room for Freedom was a really popular series though, right? So it is, you're right that if you're directing something towards a specific audience, then they come.
Like Field of Dreams.
Exactly. Ladrian, can you talk about the feminist politics of two strikes?
Sure. So I always like to talk about, it's funny, we're not talking about feminist theater, but I'm actually going to have a quote, one of my favorite quotes, which is actually by a male. It's a quote by Malcolm X. He said, the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. And so when my company created Two Strikes, our whole mission was to be, and it's in our mission statement, is to create art that is unapologetically Black femme-centric, and to upset the white patriarchal status quo. And so our whole, idea and the whole reason we exist is to center Black women. I know, during the social and racial unrest that's happened, in the last year, and all these things are happening with unarmed Black people being killed and being murdered. This whole idea of remember the hashtag Say Her Name, talking about Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor. The idea that we had to create a hashtag to be able to center Black women and their experiences really resonated with the women in my company. And that's why we really wanted to make sure we created a company that focused on Black women's stories, the unique intersectionality of those two pieces coming together. And what we've kind of done in our work is be able to celebrate that, allow women who might not be theater artists to express themselves. New playwrights who've never written before get the opportunity to see their stories reflected on stage, whether it's in a virtual stage or a real stage, hopefully a real stage soon. But just that idea to have community and have a place where Black women felt comfortable to create their own stories, to be the creators, not only the creators, but also the directors, the producers, the stage managers, to be able to show their stories in the way that it comes from their own voice and not have to ask for permission to be able to have their stories seen on other stages. So really that's kind of where we come from a feminist perspective.
And one of those pieces, This Crown Is Mine, A Journey Through Black Hair, debuted online last May, right? We have a trailer of that. If Chris, you could show that, and then we can talk more about that.
Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hey, girl. I know all of the annoying things that you're hearing right now from the white people.
Black hair. Embrace the beauty. Embrace the beauty. Embrace the beauty.
So, Ladrian, can you talk a little bit about that show and what the artists were doing with that show and what the reception was?
Sure. It's always interesting seeing that clip. I actually was the producer for that particular show, and I actually created that trailer. It was a lot of fun. So I'm reliving the memories of all of the plays that we had as a part of that performance. But what we did, we actually just commissioned and asked for folks who were interested in writing about a five minute piece. I think we ended up having about 7 or 8 playwrights participate, and all of them were Black women or non-binary folks, and they had free reign to write like a 5 to 7 minute piece about Black hair. That was it. That was the only only guidance we gave them, and we got a really, really great response from it. We had so many different stories. We had, I think, one person wrote something. She was a fro scout, right? So she had a fro and it was, acting like a Girl Scout and trying to sell the beauty of being comfortable and being comfortable in your own skin and owning your hair. We had another woman. She ended up writing a choreo poem. She actually had a dancer as a part of her piece who had dreadlocks. And so it was her story about how, she started taking ownership and being comfortable in her own skin with their hair. I think we had another person talk about the journey of what she's gone through with her hair, where her hair was, had been braided and touched and manipulated and straightened chemically, and the whole spectrum of what her hair had gone through, and kind of how, again, going toward that acceptance, being comfortable in your own skin, understanding who you are, and being proud, of being a Black woman. Because I'll tell you, being a Black woman and going through hair stories, it's a unique experience. You have to be another Black woman to fully understand that. And we all, I did notice one thing, that while we produced the show, we did it on YouTube. And we allowed audience members to be able to do a live chat at the same time. And I love that interaction, and I love the opportunity for people to see their stories. People are like, oh yeah, I remember the straightening comb. I remember that story. Oh yeah, I got braids when I was a little girl. I remember how it felt when my mom braided my hair for the first time. And people were really resonating because they had the opportunity to see their experiences, on a computer screen. So it was really a lot of fun, and it's on YouTube on our Two Strokes Theater Collective on page, and it's open and for anyone to see it. And again, I really, really had a wonderful experience producing that show, but also, seeing and listening to all the productions that participated, and all the writers, most of which were new writers. We put that out. They've never produced or never written before, so we gave them that opportunity.
I'm struck by the way you're describing the Zoom chat as like creating a kind of community, which it really did. I think for a lot of live performances that were online. And Brooke, I'm thinking about the community around Room for Cream, which the setup of that at La Mama in New York was, at least for the first few seasons, was such that the audience was kind of sitting in the coffee shop with the patrons, the coffee shop being Room for Cream, that was in this little town, in this fictional town. So, I'm struck by the way that bringing together a community is is also part of feminist practice. And Deladrian, I'm so struck by the way with this piece and with other of your pieces, you're really bringing together a lot of different artists' voices. And I'm also interested in the name of your company being a collective, specifically a collective. So I'm wondering what collective means to you, and then if other people want to jump in about that idea of collective, I'd be curious for what you have to say about the way that relates to feminism.
Sure. I think Tina kind of said it earlier. It's this whole idea that, people, all their ideas are being heard. We try our best to not, put one person's voice above the other. So in Two Strokes, at least within our company, we want it to be a communal experience, right? We want everyone who is a part of the company, the actual members, we want them to have an equal voice and an equal say in what goes on in the company. And then from another level of collective, we actually have a playwrights collective group. that we have a bunch of women who, some are established playwrights, some have never written before, and we just get the opportunity once a month on a Saturday for, an hour and a half, 2 hours. Hey, do you have something that you've written that you would like to hear out loud, or you want some constructive criticism? We're here to be a family. And I think that idea of sisterhood, that idea of support, that idea of just the collective being of, we all are in this together. We all look like each other. We all have similar experiences. How can we support each other? How can we motivate each other? How can we grow? How can we try new things and be comfortable trying new things, right? Because it's always a different experience when you do something for the first time, or you do something that you always wanted to do but never had the opportunity to do it. And so for me, collective really means allowing space to experiment, and allowing space for others to feel comfortable to be.
That's so inspiring. Anyone else want to jump in on the idea of collective?
Well, something to say, I think art making is so vulnerable, and theater making is very vulnerable. Like, you share this thing live in space, and to have those heartbeats and that breath next, it's like being on a sports team, or of an all-girls sports team like I was on, or a cool girl. You just feel like you can take on the world when you were all in that room or standing in the theater before the doors open. It's such a special feeling, that collective feeling. And I think when it is energy, like Adrian alluded to, where you're very, you're all the same people, but you're about to share this thing. And so there's, or very similar and have a specific experience, and then you're about to open up to all these other people to come into your special little world. There's just something of doing that with your people next to you, you all are suddenly found each other. It's very special to find who you're making theater with, or to stumble into the process where suddenly you're making theater with other people. And that collective nature has been for me what literally makes it possible at a spiritual level to keep the hustle doing, and because as amazing as it is, it's super hard. So it's like it keeps feeding itself, and then it's hard, but it keeps feeding itself. Yeah.
I'm thinking about this TCG conference I was at just the other week, and at my table, this really brilliant artist, Nisi Aya, was talking about the value of the artist. And, it got all of us going, and it really hit me that we're doing this really incredible spirit work, and that the visibility of that, like, we only get paid, or institutions only recognize us when we're producing something or putting something out. But really the work that we're doing is so, it's every moment. There's minutia to it. There's the grandness to it. And it's so connected to our spirit, and that we need support and nourishment, and to take care of our health and our bodies every step of the way. So in thinking about collective, I'm thinking about a space that can hold all of that, whether I'm alone in my home and dreaming of ideas, or whether I'm with other people, that all of that to me feels like a collectivity, and also the word communal. I love that word, and how I think of communing too, like that. Collective to me is whether I am with myself or with other people, where I am able to commune and connect to something that is spirit.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the relationship between your work and popular culture. Because one of the things that I notice in contemporary feminist performance is that it is engaging with popular culture in interesting ways. Like celebrating it, but also critiquing it through a feminist lens. So I'm thinking of Haruna, your piece War Lesbian, which featured you playing a kind of demonic Ellen DeGeneres. And in my reading, you know, sort of critiquing her brand of mainstream queerness. So I'm wondering how you're thinking about popular culture in your work.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think of pop culture as kind of like the lowest hanging fruit. It's like such a common denominator, and as like best case scenario as artists, we are culture makers or cultural workers. And so I feel a responsibility to, I guess, understand, to get to know that layer, the accessibility of pop culture, and then of course to break it and to dismantle it, or I don't know, do all kinds of things to it. I mean, even with Ellen, like to perform Ellen in my body as an Asian person stepping into one of the biggest white queer celebrities, that to me, I don't know, that's like horrific. And and I think the layers of that are, yeah, I think the layers are interesting. I also think of my friend who writes pop music. She's a pop musician, and she talks about pop music as casting a spell. And so I wonder too there, what if you become really in tune with that or good at that, then are you able to cast this spell? How are you using, or how are you using pop culture? How are you breaking it open? It feels like a kind of infiltration to me, and then to cast a spell.
Yeah, and you use a lot of music in your work. And Tina, you do too, like working with composers writing pop music for your work. And I would say that many of your pieces sort of critique television shows. And I'm thinking most notably of In the Pony Palace Football, which was inspired in part, right, by your love of Friday Night Lights, but it also, in your presentation of it, for me, kind of critiques that show as well. So we have a clip from football. Maybe we can, if you could set up the clip, and then we can show it and then maybe talk more about that.
Sure.
Do you want to tell us what we're going to see in this clip?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I think you're going to see a monologue by Aaron Markey, who played the running back on this football team, the Owls, which at the time we made it, all the actors were like female, but many of them since transitioned, but were like so identified. So it was sort of, you know, that people would say it was this all-female football team, but that wasn't at all what the point of the team was. They were just for these people who played football. And so in this monologue, Aaron Markey, like who's like kind of the badass star of the team in the play, is giving this football speech. And, you know, in the play, I was totally drawing off Friday Night Lights, but then I had played sports for years. So the first time I watched Friday Night Lights, I did fall in love with it. I was years late to it. And then I was like, oh my God. And then I rewatched it and I was like, wait, I was on that bus, but I was on that bus with all girls. Everything that happened on that show happened to me and my female friends. And why was I so into that story, but looked at it from the outside? So that, you know, I'm interested in sports plays and sports media. And so I was sort of just wanted to literally flip that script. Like I didn't play football, I played field hockey, but I wanted to gut inside that. And I did like the archetypal tropes of the football uniforms and the Americanness of it. And so, yeah, and I do think I rewatched this clip. I think this one I really had sort of taken a big moment from Friday Night Lights, and I completely rewrote it with like this my kind of made up sports girl lingo here, but that's what we'll see.
Great. Chris, can you play that clip? Thanks, Tina.
Do you know how many passes I've returned for a touchdown? Oh, my bad. You can't count that high. Do you know how many yards of green grass these legs have mowed down? How many tigers, panthers, lemurs, and other jungle animals I have flown by on my way to score yet again. How many Saturdays my mom threw me the football over and over and over. How many Sundays I ran all the way to the Holly Hob and back. I thank all higher sparkle powers because they are the root of my moves, and you are super major lucky that I even came to the Pony Palace at all. I like the jimmies they put on the ice cream sundaes here. I like the cheerleaders. I like Coach. And I have a soft spot for those tiny little horses that live underneath the lockers. They have beautiful manes. L-E-G-S-T-O!
I love that monologue so much. Brooke, I wonder if you want to talk about Room for Cream and its relationship to pop culture, since it was a serial, and in my opinion, kind of like an anti-L word, although I don't know if you agree with that. Can you talk about what that show was doing as far as pop culture?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think pop culture has this, one of the things about pop culture is it feels like the center of the universe inside of it, like it's the thing and everyone should know it or something. And I feel like kind of like, you know, grungy lesbians in Western Mass are not the center of the universe. So I think what Room for Cream does is it kind of makes like Room for Cream, this lesbian-owned coffee shop, that becomes really the center of the universe, right? And then we have these like references to like important queer histories and queer icons, and they're so to, you know, maybe not lesbians. Yeah, they're really lesbian icons and lesbian places. Like they're just like, what are those references? So it's its own kind of like taking what seemed like actually what feels like an invisible community or a kind of shunned community and making it like totally the center of the world and like sexy. We've been talking about making another version, and I think Tina was in on this conversation and Jess, and we wanted to call it like we ghosts in the Ozarks. So it's just like we're invisible, but we're here. So I think the L word reference is funny because it's like, actually it was audience members from, I didn't even own a television. Like I couldn't have watched the L word because I didn't have cable. I didn't own a TV at the time. You know, it was, you were still like going to the video store to rent serial dramas on DVD. Like it just, there was no streaming. None of that was happening. So I think, friends who like were audience of Room for Cream started to invite the entire cast of Room for Cream over to watch the L word when it came out, and they would like make us dinner. So it was like Room for Cream brought me to the L word, and I was like, what is that? Who are those people? We don't look and act like that. We don't have that money. So that's my popular culture reference. I just want me to be popular culture.
So I want to talk about influences on your work. So our second panel, Elisa Solomon, who was moderating, asked the panelists, and we had Margot Gomez, Ded Margolin, Mo Angelos, and Carmelita Tropicana, how aware they were of the feminist groups represented in the first panel. And we had members of It's All Right to Be Women Theater, Sue, who introduced this panel, At the Foot of the Mountain Theater, Caravan, and Women's Experimental Theater. So I want to pose a similar question to you all. Were the artists on the first two panels influential influential to you at all as you formed your own companies. So were you aware of those groups from the 70s like Women's Experimental Theater, or the groups that were working in the 80s and 90s like Split Bridges and Five Lesbian Brothers, or other groups from that era like Spider Woman or Medusa's Revenge? So, and if not, then who are your influences? Who are you, whose work inspires you? Aladrian, do you want to start?
Sure. It's funny. I always, you mentioned it earlier in my intro, I am an engineer by trade. That's what I went to school for, and that's what I do for my day job. And so I'm still in the process of kind of building my theater education on the side as my side hustle. But one of the people that I think has inspired me, especially with some of the more recent shows that we've worked on in Two Strikes, specifically with the Brown Sugar Bake Off. We did a Brown Sugar Bake Off. It's a short theatrical piece where we asked playwrights to write 10-minute plays, again, surrounding, a certain topics or certain ingredients. Reminiscent of Paula Vogel and her bake-offs. But we kind of put a little extra flavor on it and had very specific Black women ingredients. But for our first one last year, we actually had a bell hooks quote. And that got me really interested in actually learning a little bit more about her and reading a little bit more of her readings. And there's just this idea of what Black feminism looks like. I've always loved and always been inspired by Angela Davis, and I've also started reading a little bit more with Audre Lorde. And so that I also have had the opportunity to produce and participate in works by Susie Laurie Parks. So trying to build that black woman, theater background and literature background is really what I'm trying to do, and hopefully that can help to influence the work that I do with my company, Two Strikes.
Awesome. Tina, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like a late bloomer to this field, maybe in a semi-similar way to Aladrian. And so I didn't have like conservatory training. I didn't have deep theater training. I'd seen plays and I'd been in the world, but I hadn't seen a ton of stuff, definitely not experimental work at all. So in the one thing when I sort of was first thinking, gosh, I want to think about making things you'd say out loud that were performed was I was in a graduate program at Reed College, and I was introduced to Maria Irene Fornes's work, which was totally serendipitous, and it was, of course, it was an immediate influence on me, and it was that kind of thing that when I was reading her work, I was like, I think I know these codes. Like, even though it wasn't because I knew that they were codes of theater or codes of art or anything, I just somehow could feel what she meant about life and femaleness and being in the world. And so that was really influential. And then a little bit like Brooke and the L word being brought up when she's making room for cream is then once I was making early work with Half Straddle, by then I was working with people who'd gone to NYU, lived in the city, like Jess, et cetera, who I'd heard these names by then. But I did learn them from who I was working with, like the Wow Cafe, and I think, Holly Hughes, and maybe had met Holly Hughes. But those names started coming up in relation to the work I was making, that, it has some echoes of Five Lesbian Brothers or Split Bridges, but I didn't yet know that work. So it was sort of this, what was, that it was kind of exciting to have the reverse thing, like what made it like that, even though I'd never even seen it. I mean, I then went and looked at pictures or ended up seeing videos, but it was really interesting to have that resonance. It was sort of a cool backlight thing that then felt really neat to be kind of into that lineage sideways and by mistake, but then feel like it was so meaningful to know who these artists were. So, yeah.
What about you?
Well, I had a similar experience. I came to theater through a love of Japanese film. So my first I also majored in engineering. And then my last semester, I took 6 English courses to switch to an English major. I had to decide, because if I took one more course, I'd be a mechanical engineer. And then I went to Japan, to really to study Japanese theater, and I had started to see like Wooster Group and Richard Foreman, and I was really, I think because I was an engineer, invested in like form and structure and interested in, so I got really obsessed with like Eugenio Barba and Grotowski and just sort of the theater greats that are sort of historically these people who are really thinking about form and the body. And then then when I went to grad school, I actually met Deb Margolin in grad school and took feminist theater courses and was introduced to split britches. But first, when I went to New York, I was making like Polish plays and Japanese plays and thinking about sort of how we tell stories and like structure. And it wasn't until I became obsessed with serial, like the serial drama and how a serial story is told, that I started to get interested in people like John Jezerin and Jeff Weiss, and this idea of the kind of live serial and the collective, an audience kind of building themselves around a serial and serials going on for years. And so, I think I wanted to be kind of clean one-to-one because I do feel deeply in community with Split Britches and Holly Hughes and Anne Bogart, and they're people I know and I talk to and I love so much, and Dance Noise. Like, I identify myself in lineage with them, or I feel like they made it possible for me to be me. But I think I came to it, through Japanese film.
And you were kind of mentored by Ellen Stewart, right, at La Mama?
Yeah, like immediately. Like as soon as I showed up, she was a big advocate, always made space for me. She's she's so intimate in her relationships with the artists, like just real, La Mama, like a real mother. And when she grabs onto you and believes in your success and your voice, she just really makes it possible. And it's not just Ellen, it's all of La Mama, the people there and the other artists there are, I wouldn't be me have had my career in New York or have done the things I've done if it wasn't for everybody, Nikki Parizzo, everybody in the office, Mia, you name it. They've been incredible, and they're real nurturing.
Haruna, what about you? I know that you've talked about Taylor Mack and Young Jean Lee mentoring you early in your career. And I should say that both you and Tina attended Mac Wellman's playwriting MFA at Brooklyn College. But who else shaped your career?
Yeah, but I love that you bring up Taylor Mack. I was in a show of his, The Lily's Revenge, where I got to work with Mariel Miguel from Spider-Woman Theater. So I just love the connectivity there. So it was a bit of a retroactive, fanning over her after meeting her. I think of Coco Fusco and Guillermo Gomez Pena, and the badassery of their work was it was so thrilling to me early on. And then also Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic is so deeply, a part of my work. And then more, I guess, those are generationally elders. And then coming a little closer to my own generation, I think of Adrienne Kennedy's Funny House of a Negro was huge. And also, Claudia Rankine and Citizen, just her writing and the auto-theoretical style is super inspiring. And then now, I think of Sybil Kempson and Taylor Mack, Young Jean, Carol Walker's art too is so the Sugar Baby that she did at the Sugar Factory. And then right now I'm really excited by Andrea Long Chu's critical essays and It's just so good.
We're to stay with you for a minute. So I refer in my writing to our moment as post-wave, and I do that to indicate that we should be moving away from this wave model of feminism, which I find problematic for a number of different reasons, and also to mark this kind of intergenerational exchange that I see happening in feminist politics and in theater practice. So I'm curious for all of you to talk about like intergenerational exchange in your work. But Haruna, in particular, I'm thinking about you performing alongside your mother in Suicide Forest. So I would love for us to see the clip, this very moving clip from that. Will you set it up for us? And then we can talk about what that was like for you to perform afterwards.
Yes. So this is a clip from my play Suicide Forest that was very much inspired by Adrienne Kennedy's Funny House of the Negro, and how she was able to tap into this dark Black femme psychic space. And just the idea of a play existing in a psychic space was, it kind of blew me away. And so I attempted to do that for myself, but thinking about my Japanese and Asian American identity, and really going into this nightmarish, horrific space. And so the play follows a Japanese schoolgirl and the salaryman, and they're very wretched characters. And the first part of the play is really following them and their kind of desire towards self-erasure, and how that is so persistent of a desire within them. And then when we get to this midpoint, we see that the schoolgirl kind of comes to her own, while the salaryman very sadly does not make it out of that very toxic world. And we follow the schoolgirl Azusa now into this forest, into Aokigahara, which is Suicide Forest at the base of Mount Fuji. And then here she meets this clan of goats who are performed by the same actors from the first part, who are very cruel to each other. But here there's this kind of communing and community and a ritual. And all of this, I feel like the bulk of the play and the journey of that is get to this moment here, where my mother, who was performing alongside me as a spirit of the forest, emerges, and then we break character, and she and I have a conversation, an intergenerational conversation, but really for me to show the difficulty of having a mother who is an immigrant, whose language you don't speak so well, and to see, I wanted to share that. And I think it took the entirety of the play to step through the play to get to a place where we felt held enough to have that moment with each other, and then for me to ask her some questions, which she never answers.
Great, thank you. Chris, can we play that clip?
Thank you. I prepared some questions for you. Is it okay if I ask them out loud?
いいわよ。
Ready?
準備はもうできているわ。
Why did we move to Seattle from Japan? What did you do behind closed doors? Did you blame yourself when Dad was sick? Did you ever love your mother? Did you feel shame growing up? chosen to be alone. Do you miss him? I don't need you anymore, little ghost mama, ghost mama, ghost mama. I don't need you anymore, little ghost mama, ghost mama, ghost mama. And I'll no longer carry your pain, little ghost mama, ghost mama, ghost mama.
I'm so struck by the physicality of that, the way that it embodies exactly what you're talking about, Haruna, the like coming together and then pushing apart and coming back together again. It's really moving. Another way I think to signal intergenerational connection is through adapting older works. So something that came up in the first panel was how feminist groups in the 70s were adapting canonical texts. So Roberta and Sandra from Women's Experimental Theater talked about adapting Greek plays and focusing on the women characters. Martha talked about At the Foot of the Mountains, feminist revision of Brecht's The Exception and the Rule. And I know, Tina, you adapted Chekhov's Seagull for your company. And Brooke, you've done a lot of adaptations in your career, but I'm thinking in particular of your adaptation of Susan Glaspell's Trifles, which is already a feminist text in a way. And so we have a clip of that we can watch in a second, but can you talk about what you were after when you adapted that text? It was in 2010, right?
Yeah. I mean, so that was after I started working on Room for Cream. I came back to that. And with these texts, I'm interested in texts like less about the story, the narrative arc, but like how story is inside how the text is. And Trifles to me is such a feminist text because the protagonist is absent. She's not even there. And the other two maybe protagonists, or the two women who the story centers around, never speak. Like, they're telling each other the truth, and they're kind of conceding that, all right, they know this woman murdered her husband and they figure out why, but they're never like, hey, isn't this true, or don't you think? They kind of just like agree by not speaking the truth when it arrives, and then they like also agree to conceal all the evidence, the trifles. And the more they're kind of humiliated by the men in the house, the more they kind of, they sort of perform upholding the space of the men, but they undermine it constantly. And the way she writes that play, it's like a very short play, but she writes it with all these dots that kind of indicate silence. And so I was interested in, like, I started working on it and just like pulling the silence out, like really having us be aware of like the unspoken and the tension in what's not spoken or what's spoken under that. And then this is like the funny part of the story, and I'll be quick about it, is I was like invited by the Polish Cultural Institute to like to this tour of Poland, and I saw all these shows, and I was invited to the Grotowski Theater Lab, and this group of Ukrainian women singers like were singing it at the Grotowski Theater Lab, and they were like singing at us, and it was so impassioned and so moving, but I actually they were obviously singing in Ukrainian, but in my mind, they weren't singing words, right? I was like, they were singing wordless songs. So I came back and I was like, we have to do a play where the women, whenever they have this like need to emote, and they sing wordless songs at each other. And so I kept going on and on about these wordless songs. And finally, one of the artists in the company was like, can you tell me and we wrote wordless songs that the women sing, right? Because I was convinced of them. And then one of the company members was like, who is this group? And I got a hold of like a CD, and then she's like, these aren't wordless songs. They're like Ukrainian. They're like words. So that's naivete. I don't know what I was like. So I had this idea that's what I was doing. Like I was finding the sort of tension, like that whole script or the whole project was built around like what wasn't spoken and like this undercurrent between these two women. And then whenever you really felt like the play wanted to explode, I had them like sing wordless songs.
Great. Chris, can we see the clip so we can hear those wordless songs?
But I suppose just to make her feel more natural. She said they was in the top drawer. In this cupboard. Yes, here. And then her little shawl that always hung behind the door.
Brooke, what was the thought behind adapting that in 2010? Like, what was it that drew you to that text at that moment?
I mean, I feel like this, well, I actually was taking another course at NYU, but which I call Feminism and Form, because I brought all these contemporary texts, like Sybil Kempson texts, Aaron Courtney texts, Jason Grote texts, Richard Maxwell texts. I brought them all into the students, and I was kind of like, choose a scene that you think you can nail. And then I was like, and choose a scene that's like really difficult for you. And all the students, women and men, at that point, women and men, and they all chose scenes from the text by the male playwrights. And then the scenes that they thought were like, I'm not sure, were by the female playwrights. And it got to be this thing of like, they didn't understand the conflict. Where like the Aaron Courtney play and the Sybil Kempson play, like what was happening inside there, it wasn't like this like kind of two-fisted scene where you could like, there was the drama. It was like this thing that was happening underneath. So it was like this kind of conversation that seemed about something else. And I became really like obsessed with that idea. And so when I came across trifles, I was like, this is the perfect example. So there were all these contemporary playwrights, and still are, writing these plays that are addressing the kind of tension and intimacy and like conflict in these ways that aren't just like bow, that aren't like Ibsen's version of feminism, where you like scream and yell at everybody and burn their scripts and stuff, burn their manuscripts. So I think as that, just thinking about like, why do people still think men write dramatic plays and women tell little stories? Which they don't. Very dramatic.
And Ladrine, I'm curious too about your adaptation of Rimke's Rachel. So you're adapting an early 20th century anti-lynching drama for our current moment. Can you talk about that adaptation? What drew you to that? How you adapted it?
Sure. So Rapid London, shout out to Rapid London Productions, local theater company that champions local playwrights in Baltimore. The executive director of that theater, I had worked with him on a previous play that I had written for the company, and he came to me with the script, and I read it, and I said, I have to adapt it. And so this was my first adaptation. Unlike Brooke, I'm still very new to that kind of world. But I read the story, and it really struck me. We were talking earlier about intergenerational experiences, and the idea that this play was written in the 1920s, and it's talking about racism. It's talking about this idea that children being confronted with their Blackness from a negative space. And I was like, well, that sounds really familiar. I know that story. My mother knows that story. My grandmother knows that story. My future children will know that story. And especially really resonating with, what's been happening, especially in, social justice and what's been happening in the current time period with Black Lives Matter and all of that. It felt like the story still had power. So really, the crux of the story, really did not change. But I kept a lot of the language that Angelina Weld Grimke had in her original text. All I had to do was really just update it and modernize some of the language, and again, bring some of those concepts of not just having someone being called the N-word, but also bringing in police brutality and Black Lives Matter and making it a lot more relevant to today. But again, these conversations about race haven't changed since the 1920s. They're going to continue to happen in Black households. I know I at a very young age, my parents told me what it was going to mean to be a Black woman in America and to be able to be prepared for that. And I can tell you from a personal perspective, my husband and I, my husband is white, but we've been trying to have children for the last couple of years, and both of us have struggled with infertility. And so last summer, during the whole summer of unrest and social justice issues, I had actually finished an IVF cycle. So I actually had 2 frozen embryos hanging out on ice, waiting, suspended, waiting to be born. And I had pause. I was like, the idea that I'm making this active choice, that I want to be a mother, that I want to have that experience, and I want to be able to lead a new generation of people. But the idea that I'm going to bring, a biracial, Black child into this world, and I'm going to have to teach them and talk to them about the same things that my mother had to talk to me about, that her mother had to talk to her about, that her mother had to talk to her about, it struck me. And in my own personal work as a playwright, I've written lots of work about being a Black woman and infertility and the struggle related to that. But the intersectionality of my story and the idea of Rachel and that story behind that, I had to bring that story to bear. I had to show people that you want Black women want to be mothers. They want to take care of their children. At the same time, they have this extra burden that other women or other people of color might not understand and might not resonate with. So it was really, really important for me to tell the story and to tell it with a more modern ear, so that it would resonate a lot more with people today.
And what was the response from audiences?
I think it was really positive. I think people really understood and really, really got the message. It's interesting. The original play was written again in the 1919s, and it was commissioned through the NAACP. It was actually one of the first plays that had an all-black cast, and it was written by a biracial woman, and it was originally written for white audiences. It was meant to allow white audiences to hear and understand how racism and lynchings and this idea of the Ku Klux Klan, because this was written about the time Birth of the Nation was created in response to that. But it was written to allow white audience to understand the plights of Black people during that time. That was the original intent of that play. And so I still wanted to keep that piece of it, but at the same time, I wanted this play also to be a play for Black people, right? So understand and see a reflection of the kinds of conversations that they have in their own households with their family and with their children about race and about how you act in public and about being careful when you talk to the police and knowing that people are going to believe certain things about you. And so having both of those kinds of audiences participate and see it, I think people really, really resonated with it and enjoyed it. And I look forward to making some tweaks and edits, as we all playwrights do when they hear their work for the first time, and hoping it has a life, in the future.
Fantastic. Tina or Haruna, do you want to talk about adaptation? I know, Haruna, you've adapted a lot of literary text in your work, and Tina, I'm thinking of your production of The Seagull. Do you have anything to add about adaptations?
When I was first started working with Chekhov's The Seagull, I sort of didn't realize what it meant to take on Chekhov. I just had fallen in love with that play. And so I didn't even think, well, how do I change the gender of these casting? I'm like, Jess Barbagallo is Treplev. Like, that was just so clear to me. And that Becca Blackwell holds all the male roles in this version of Seagull. And there was even like a little intergenerational nod in making Susie Sokol, who was like this downtown actress in sort of this kind of traditionally male vibed company, putting her in a different kind of costume and look than she usually gets and making her like the female grande dame of our show. So a lot of that was just very like my instincts for like, and then I realized, of course, I was tearing at the fabric of Chekhov by doing that. And then the other thing that I very intrinsically did, I saw a version of it on Broadway, which was a regular version of Seagull. But suddenly the lens I had on it was that this was Masha and Nina's story. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, I really felt this. I was like, Chekhov wrote this adolescent girls play. Like, I just saw it that way. And that those two coming of age as like female artists, like they each wanted to be, and who were they in the world, really felt like the center of the play to me. And that was sort of the love story, like just whatever that romance was between those two girls trying to find themselves, not even actually necessarily sexual or truly romantic, felt like the heartbeat of The Seagull to me. And that's what I wanted to try to figure out for myself by working on it. So it was like kind of a as always, when we all do our projects, a very personal way in. I was just like that. The play was like the material, and then I wanted to be inside it. I mean, this is how you all, Brooke and Eladrian both spoke inside about the stuff, but that was how my adaptation of it came to be. I wasn't like, what can I do to Seagull? I was like, I want to use the script, and then this is how I find myself inside it.
Just to add to this conversation of adaptation, I don't really adapt historical text that much, but in thinking about adaptation, I had this really interesting talk with this poet, Natasha and Nevada Diggs, and she was talking about self-translation. And this makes me think of, I mean, especially for BIPOC immigrant artists, like continually marginalized or, perpetually this foreigner, even though I am American and I speak English, there's this constant having to translate or adapt one's own work and ideas and body just to make it make sense. And there's this extra work of having to be so, I'm thinking of this word strength too, back to what Adrian said, the strength and conviction of believing in your work, and then having to do that extra layer of work to make it valid in a sense, that there's so many experiences of invalidation that art of adaptation or translation to me comes in handy in thinking about how to contextualize what it is I am creating. That scene is seemingly like people are like, what is this? I don't know.
Yeah, that speaks to something I wanted to talk about, which we've talked about in both panels, which is like the persistent whiteness of both feminism and I would say feminist theater. And you saying, Haruta, the extra layer is reminding me of Aladrian. I don't know that you told the derivation of or where your theater company's name comes from, but that reminds me of that. Do you want to speak about that? I know you spoke about the mission of the company.
Yeah, sure. So Two Strikes Theater Collective, people are always like, why Two Strikes? What does that mean? But I don't remember who I heard it from. It's probably some older, wiser Black woman, because they know all things. But I heard that being a Black woman, I have two strikes against me. Being not only a woman, but also being Black and being a person of color. It's those two intersectionalities, again, that are very specific and very unique. And we tend to kind of get thrust to the background very often and have to work a lot harder, not only in theater spaces, but also within, the feminist waves and within feminism, right? And so, when we were coming up with names, I said, I think that's a perfect name, right? Let's use those two strikes and use them as a positive influence, right? I see them as having strength, as I said earlier. They embody such positive emotions to me that we want to use those two strikes. We always say to burn the table, right? We always talk about theater and opportunities. Hey, let's get a seat at the table. And we said, no. Let's take our two strikes and burn the table and create our own table that is not steeped in patriarchy or whiteness. Let's just create a table that's meant for us and by us. And that's kind of where the Two Strikes and Flames and the whole the area surrounding our logo kind of came from.
That's great. We are almost at the end of our time. So I want to invite, we have a couple of questions from the audience, but I want to invite the audience to submit any questions that you have. But in the meantime, we have a question from Gemma Dobbs that could transition us into talking about what you all are working on now. So Gemma asks to Tina how story is inside how the text is, something that you said earlier, and she would love to hear you talk about is this a room as found text? So that's, you can give the context, Tina, for that show that you're currently having its run on Broadway.
Sure. So Is This a Room? The entire dialogue and script is word for word, beginning to end, an FBI transcript of an interrogation of a young American woman named Reality Winner. And it happened in June 2017. And she was a whistleblower, who shared documents that showed proof of Russian interference in our election. And we just show the FBI everything that's in the exact transcript. So, the way in, for me, I think was similar to what I was finding, like in Seagull, with Masha and Nina, I felt a heartbeat with them as soon as I had read a tiny bit about Reality Winner, but as soon as I was reading this transcript, just free reading it, I felt like a heartbeat, a dramatic theater heartbeat in this character who was a real person captured saying real things to the FBI, who were saying real things back to her on this document I was reading. And it just was a strong impulse that this was a person who there was life to show, you know, on a stage potentially, and that the story, it was this compact thriller of like, she's being questioned, you know, you go in or read it usually knowing that she is in prison, but how does it happen? And also it just became this incredible character study because you had this real-time person having their stakes immediately raised and watching them try to raise them back down beat by beat with both like deeply intense moments and then bizarrely funny and banal things. So the story was just all there in the dialogue. And for me to make it like a story that sat on stage was like making a laboratory for energy, and that this young woman was in this long form conversation, and how did that energy move, which is, you know, putting things on stage. But that was the real story for me, was the energy and reality within that. What it felt like for her, sort of beat by beat, was the dramaturgical anchor, that, you know, then we go sometimes to what the agents might have been feeling, but really it was always like, what is she potentially feeling, or what did we imagine she could feel, so that we could build that energy field around her from that transcript.
And Deladrian, what are you working on right now? You all just finished streaming Brown Sugar Bake Off, right? So what's coming up for Two Strikes?
Yeah, I was also the producer for that, and we did that as a filmed piece, and so I had lots of late nights with editing. So Deladrian is taking a break, but for Two Strikes, we're actually taking a little bit of a hiatus to do some just, you know, administrative kind of stuff. We're really hoping to get our 501c3 affiliation hopefully here in the next couple of months. So I'll be working with our group to execute that. But we're kind of tired of creating all the ideas, and so we're going to have an open call for folks in the local community to say, hey, what would you like to see on stage? You know, do you want to direct something? Or is there something you'd like to write? And we're going to meet with several different audiences in the next couple of months, or several different theater makers and artists in the next couple of months, and kind of see what comes out of that. And then for me personally, as an artist, I'm actually going to start trying screenwriting. I've got some opportunities and some possible fellowships. So I'm trying to work some scripts and theater scripts and kind of make them screenwriting scripts. And then also I constantly am writing and working and working on some things related to that. So we'll see what happens next. 2022 is going to be an interesting year for Two Strikes and for Deladrian personally and professionally as a theater maker. So I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. And Haruna, you've been doing some screenwriting, right?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
The Brooklyn College MFA programs. Do you want to talk about that and what else you're working on right now?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I wrapped season 2 of The Flight Attendant Writer's Room, and then I kind of jumped into Tina's old job, which is directing this MFA playwriting program at Brooklyn College. And my goodness, it's just it's night and day, and it's very nourishing, just because the pace of writers' rooms are very go. So it's been really beautiful to sit with other creatives and in this kind of unpressurized way, sharing work and sharing ideas. And I've been working on like a new old play. I wrote it in 2012 and then I put it down because I just didn't know how to move forward with it. And it was a story about it is a story about my grandmother who passed, and my mother returning back to Japan to take care of her, and how much resentment there was in that relationship because she had left her. And so I put it down because I think I didn't know how to conceive of a world that was fully populated by Japanese heritage people in the US. But now that I have Suicide Forest under my belt, I feel, oh, I have this community. I have a director who understands me and what I'm trying to do in this kind of a translation of a Japanese play that is an American play. And so I'm kind of back in the waters of that piece.
Wow, is there any productions on the horizon, or it's too early for that yet? You're still working.
It's so early, and I just get these really delicious moments to sit with Aya Ogawa, who directed Suicide Forest, and have this kind of 5-year relationship that we've built, and then to keep going, the delight of moving forward.
That's wonderful. Brooke, what are you working on?
Well, one of the things I'm working on a sort of a project with the poet Ross Gay and the new music ensemble Yarn Wire and the composer Taishan Sori. And we're building it, we're developing it over 2.5 years at this school in Philadelphia called Girard College, which is a grade 1st through 12 school. It started as a school for white orphans, and now it's a school for, it's a free school for students in Philadelphia who don't have a parent or are living with a guardian or are in the foster care system. And it's a really massive campus, and they're trying to start an initiative that's like more outward facing, where they use their big spaces to produce and premiere works. And we're the first artist making a large scale performance piece there. And it's called Beholding. I was going to show the book. And it's basically a performance of Ross Gay's long poem, Beholding. And it's being scored by Taishan and performed live. And then right now we're just really develop, what does that look like to kind of turn a long poem into a scored performance that's not an opera, but that has the kind, we'll have some choreography and score, and it will have a probably 6-channel video component. We're doing it in this huge old gym, like an NBA sized gym from the 30s. And so that's been amazing. It's been, talk about collaboration. It's been so nice to be back in the room with people, even though we don't know what this project is going to become. It's so great to have a long period of development and to be in the room with so many brilliant thinkers and asking hard questions about race. And it's been amazing. So I'm working on that, and that is very concrete. We'll premiere in May of 2023. And I'm also writing a book of essays on directing. And I am working on a bunch of projects, one with Kristen Cosmos, Agnes Berinsky, and Corinne Keithley-Sire. So just nice.
A lot going on. And Yarn Wire was the ensemble that did the music for Trifles that we heard earlier, Brooke. Is that right?
Yeah, Yarn Wire did Trifles. The drummers from Yarn Wire had also done Drum on the Waves of Horikawa, Major Barbara. They're artists I've been
longtime collaborators of yours.
Yeah.
We are almost at our time. I want to end with something that Elisa Solomon did in the second panel that I thought was amazing, which she called a lightning round. So if you just want to answer in a really quick way, each of you in one sentence, what is your vision for the future of feminist theater? Brooke, you go first.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think there's a vision for the future of just like a different future, a radical new future. And people are doing great work, like creating new futures, is thinking through like decolonizing contracts. And so my vision is really visions that are already out there for like rethinking the system so that marginalized voices have power and strength and are put first.
Haruna.
I am going to piggyback off of Brooke, that word radical. Like, I think it's a radically soft space. Theater, it's a soft space that lets us just dive into our most dangerous and most dark ideas. I think like it is that.
Tina.
I'm going to say, hearing all of you and the past panels, that my sentence is, we got this.
Yes. Aladrian?
I'll say it in 3 words: intersectional, bold, and control. The fact that we have all of these women right here who are taking ownership and taking control of our stories in various different ways, I think that's important, because our stories are bold and they need to be told, but the best people to tell them are us.
And I'm just going to say I'm not a woman and non-binary, but yes, non-cis men.
Fantastic way to end. So I will give it over to Sue. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here and taking part in this panel. It's really been a pleasure and an honor to moderate. And Sue, I will pass it to you for closing remarks.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, panelists. It has been a fabulous and inspiring conversation. And Jessica and I want to thank Sarah, Cornell, the panelists, the sponsors, and all of you for joining us this evening for this panel and the previous 2 panels. The video from this panel, as well as the other 2, will also be archived on feministtheater.com, where you can find out more information about the theater groups and panelists. And thank you so much for joining us.